All right, good morning, everyone. It is Thursday. The start of week 14 in the NFL will be tonight. Um, and I did not make a video making my picks for Sunday of week 13. Uh, Hang on. There we go. Now we're good. So I'm going to tell you the picks I had, tell you the record I had, and I don't think there's any doubt that I had these picks as I'm about to say them, even though the results of the games are already in place because I went 7-6, one of my worst weeks of the year. So if that doesn't tell you that these picks are honest, I don't know what will, because if I was lying, I would not give myself a 7-6 record. I had Dallas picked in the Thursday night game against Seattle. I'd said that in the last video. Um, and Dallas ended up winning. I had them picked, but they let Seattle score way too many points. Their defense did not show up, and they made Seattle, who's a pretty good, a good team, they made them look like a great team. So there is some concerns with Dallas's defense if they're going to give up that kind of play to decent offenses or good offenses, especially when it comes playoff time. Starting the Sunday games, I had Tennessee picked to beat Indianapolis. This was strictly because they were at home. Indianapolis won that game, so I got that wrong. I had the Chargers picked to beat New England. They ended up winning that game 6-0, I believe. Just outright terrible game. I had the Jets picked to beat Atlanta. I thought the Jets defense would play pretty good, and it did. They got a safety right off the bat, and they kept Atlanta from getting hardly any points. I think they only scored maybe 13 points, but they lost like 13-6 or 13-7 or 8. I don't know what it was, but just a really bad game by the Jets. So I got that game wrong. I had Detroit picked to beat New Orleans. They jumped out to a huge lead and they managed to hang on while New Orleans tried to come back. Um, New Orleans made a great effort, made it really close, but didn't quite pull it off. We had Pittsburgh hosting Arizona. I had Pittsburgh picked in this one just because their defense. That's really the only reason I've been picking them on a regular basis. Is that I feel like their defense has probably kept them in a lot of games. It's helped them win a lot of games, and that's why I've picked them. But we had multiple rain delays in this game, and ultimately Kenny Pickett got hurt. Well, we're still seeing some issues with Deontay Johnson. Last week he had um, put forth no effort in recovering a fumble. And this week, when they were down multiple scores, he scored a touchdown and went through an excessive celebration dance on his touchdown. And it's just a really bad look when you're losing that bad and you go through that long of a touchdown celebration. So, um, Arizona won that game. I had Pittsburgh picked, so I got that wrong. Tyreek Hill racked up a ton of yards and two touchdowns in Miami's win over Washington. I had Miami picked. Tua, not Tua. Hill is now on pace for I think around 2,100 yards or somewhere around there. I think he needs less than 600 yards. So with 5 games left, um, I'm not sure the exact amount he needs, but I think around 120 a game will get him to 2,000. Maybe even a little bit less, maybe barely over 100. Um, Next, I picked Denver to beat Houston. This game was in Houston. I thought Russell Wilson was playing really good football. Denver's defense was playing really well, and ultimately the difference in this game was Russell Wilson made a couple mistakes with the ball. He ended up throwing 3 interceptions, and that's why Denver lost. I still think Denver was the right pick there, but obviously Houston ended up pulling that game out. I had Tampa Bay picked to beat Carolina. That did happen. I had the Rams picked to beat Cleveland just because of their quarterback situation, and it's really not a lot to know with that. I mean, there's no one really knows what's going on at quarterback, and because of that, the defense can only do so much. And the Rams have been playing pretty good, so I had the Rams picked. I had San Francisco picked to beat Philly. This was a really tough game for me. I went back and forth on who I was going to pick. I felt like San Francisco was probably the little bit better team, but with Philadelphia being the reigning NFC champs, the game being in Philadelphia, and them being underdogs, and just the that whole team and really that whole city, they they thrive on that underdog mentality. I mean, the whole Rocky story, the whole playoff run to their Super Bowl back, I believe in it was the 2017 seasons. Um, they were underdogs at home every game of the playoffs, so they really embraced the underdog mantra. So it was really hard to pick this game, but ultimately I went San Francisco just because they'd been playing better, and I thought they were just a little bit overall the better team. And that pick paid off very well because San Francisco thoroughly manhandled Philly. I don't think this necessarily means that they are uh, going to be able to do this in the playoffs because, I mean, we still got 5 weeks before the playoffs even start. So if you were to see these two teams play in the playoffs, it could be 6, 7, or maybe even 8 weeks from now. I don't think it'd be 8 weeks, but 6 or 7 weeks from now. So um, a lot can change between then and now. A lot of injuries can happen, and teams can get hot, get on a roll. So I really don't think this means a whole lot for the playoffs, but San Francisco was the better team on that day. Excuse me. On to the Sunday night game. Uh, I had Kansas City picked in to beat Green Bay. Had I made the video, I would have said that I thought Green Bay would lose but cover the spread. I believe the spread was like 7.5 or 8.5. I felt like Green Bay would keep this game close just because Kansas City's offense has had its struggles. Green Bay's defense has played fairly well in most games. Um, I don't think they have lived up to the expectation or played as well as they should have in a lot of games, but they had been averaging about 20 points a game or so, and I believe they were in the top half of the league. And I knew if we could keep Kansas City's offense somewhere around 20 points, we would definitely have a great chance to cover the spread with how well our offense has been playing. And um, I figured, and I also knew that the couple games that Kansas City has lost, their defense has given up more than 20 points. And I think every win they've had, they have not given up 21 points. Uh, I think the exception to that may have been last week against the Raiders. I think they may have given up. Um, Let me go back. I say last week, 2 weeks ago when they played the Raiders. Uh, nope, they only gave up 17. So yeah. I believe every game Kansas City has won, their defense has not given up 20 points. I felt confident in Green Bay's ability to score about 17 on them, and um, I was pleasantly surprised to see Green Bay take the opening kick down the field, score a touchdown, hold Kansas City to a field goal, turn around, score another touchdown. And I mean, to be up at halftime 14-6 was great. Kansas City did make it close and made it interesting. Um, they were down 8 points going into the last drive of the game. Um, I think around a little bit less than a minute, around a minute on the clock. And that last drive was a really bad drive for the refs because there were several calls that were not right on that drive. Could have changed the outcome of the game. And I say that it could have changed how the game ended and how it was perceived to have ended because so right off the bat you had Mahomes that were scrambled, trying to scramble for a first down. I believe he would had the first down, but this was around the 45, 50-yard line, and he got hit by, um, not 100% sure. I want to say Ford, but I don't know if it was Ford or not. But he got hit as he was going out of bounds. He was still in the field of play. Both feet, not a single part of his body had touched out of bounds yet, and he got hit. And they called a late hit, unnecessary roughness, and that was 100% wrong call. That moved the ball 15 yards up. Um, so, and then the next play was a fumble. I say that on the field they let it play out, but it looked like it was a fumble that Green Bay recovered, ran back for a touchdown. But Pacheco threw a punch after the play, so it was ruled that the runner was down by contact, but the penalty on Pacheco moved it back 15 yards, and that had Pacheco ejected from the game for throwing that punch. And then the next play was I think a pass to MVS, and he went out of bounds going backwards, and the referee um, called that the clock for the called for the clock to stop, and that I believe was the wrong call, because if your forward progress is ruled as being stopped, then the clock stays running because you're ruled down in the field of play, and if you're going backwards out of bounds, you're also it's not you know the clock runs, and this was with like 20 seconds on the clock, 21 seconds when it stopped. So if that is ruled properly, they get up there and they maybe have one play, maybe two if they're lucky, but really you can really only guarantee one play at that point. And that could have changed things. And obviously the next play was the missed pass interference call on Green Bay. uh, the defender was basically on MVS's back, didn't get called. And then obviously the last play was a Hail Mary. There was a shove in the back on Travis Kelce in that play, which could have been called pass interference. But if you look closely, there's um, Kansas City players shoving Green Bay players, so you really could call pass interference on either team. So I don't have an issue with pass interference not being called on the Hail Mary, unless it's just absolutely egregious. You're never going to see a PI call on a Hail Mary play, and that's fine. That's not a big deal. Um, I had several people text me and saying, "Oh, you can thank the refs for this game and for that win." And I'm not I'm not about that. I know in the press conference after the game, Mahomes said they were letting him play, and he's kind of about that. It's the right thing for him to say, even though on the field he's begging for a flag on every single play. um, there's that really bothers me. I hate how so many players beg for a flag. You have defensive linemen that get a slight tug on their jersey when they're pursuing the ball carrier, and they turn around and look in the ref, throwing their hands up like it's bad for the game. So many players begging for a flag. Every receiver they look for a flag on every play. Your quarterbacks look for a flag every time they're touched. It's it's ridiculous, and I hate it. Um, but all that being said, I do not. I mean, yes, the referees were bad on that drive. Um, had the 15-yard penalty not been called on Green Bay, would Kansas City still have, got a 15-yard penalty called on them to bring it back? Who knows? Had the referee not called forward progress, or had not stopped the clock, saying that MVS went out of bounds, how much time would have ran off the clock? How many more plays would they have had? It's a lot of hypotheticals. Um, but I mean, yes, the game could have went a different direction. Yes, Kansas City could have had a chance to score. They could have got a touchdown. Would they have gotten the 2-point conversion? Who knows? Because they would have needed it to tie. So it's no guarantee that they would have even got the tie if they did get the touchdown. And um, I'm not one to complain about the refs when it's hurt my team in the past. So I'm also not gonna be like brag about the refs helping us. And I believe Nick Wright said it best on whatever show he is on. I don't know the name of it, but he said that he didn't agree with everyone blaming the refs for Kansas City's wins in some games and some big games. Obviously, a good example is the Super Bowl. So he said, and in return, he said because he doesn't like it when people blame the refs for their wins, he's not going to blame the refs for this loss. And I'm about that. I respect that because I'm the same way. The one game that is the exception to that rule would be the Fail Mary in Seattle with the replacement refs. You can watch that play, and it's 100% obvious that the defender had the ball, caught it, had possession, and then Golden Tate reaches in and grabs it, and that is not simultaneous possession. Um, it was 100% possessed by the defender, caught, controlled, and then Tate reached in to gain control himself afterwards. That play should have been ruled an interception, and Green Bay should have won that game. That's the lone exception to me saying the refs cost Green Bay a game, and they weren't even the real refs; they were replacement refs. And ultimately, that game and that bad of a look on Monday Night Football is what got the contract done for the real refs to get back in. So there was a little bit of positive that come out of it, but um, and later and down the stretch, Green Bay, that had they have won that game, they could have been in the playoffs over the Vikings. And I say that I think Green Bay was a wild card team, so I think they still made the playoffs, but they could have won the division over the Vikings had that play not been, that game not been a factor. So it could have changed the course of the season, but it is what it is. Like I said, I'm not one to complain when the referees make bad calls that go against Green Bay, because ultimately you've got 60 minutes to win the game, and if you're relying, or if your only reason for not winning is one bad call for the ref, then you didn't do your job the rest of the game. Um, as good as they played on both sides of the ball, had Green Bay lost that game due to the refs, then there's obviously something else they could have done at some point in time. Your offensive job is to score points. Your defensive job is to stop points from being scored. So if you lose, if the refs make a bad call in a game that you lost 38-35, your defense didn't do its job all game. On the flip side of that, if you lose a game 6-3 and the refs make a bad call, then your offense didn't do its job all game. So um, I just don't. I'm not one. Like I said, I'm not one to complain about the refs and things like that. So Green Bay pulled it out. Great win for them. That puts them in the 7 seed right now. They have tiebreakers over Seattle and the Rams. So they are currently sitting in a wild card spot with a very easy schedule. I believe that one of the easiest schedules in the league to end the year. I believe this week they're playing on the road in New York, playing the Giants on Monday Night Football. I think they follow that up with, I'm not sure the order, but our next two games after this week is Tampa Bay and Carolina, both winnable games. And then we end the season against Minnesota and then Chicago. So, depending on what Minnesota does with Josh Dobbs at quarterback, if they drop a game or two, we could move up into um, the 6 seed, and that would be ideal for a playoff seeding spot, because being in the 6 seed will mean wild card weekend we would travel to Detroit to play the Lions, who we beat in Detroit on Thanksgiving. So that's a game we could win in the playoffs. Being the 7 seed, you're either uh, in, you thought I hit the button on my mic. If you're the 7 seed, you are essentially drawing the short straw and going to either Philadelphia or Seattle, who I believe one of those two teams will be the 2 seed. Um, there's a chance Dallas could end up the 2 seed, but I really don't see that happening myself. But either way, you would not want to go on the road to any of those three teams. But obviously, if you win the first one, then you're going to have to go on the road to one of those two. So um, it's just kind of luck of the draw, honestly, at that point. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry yawning so much. Um, on to the Monday night game. I had Jacksonville picked to beat Cincinnati. Cincinnati's on a backup quarterback who played really well. I think his name was Browning. This was a very tense game for me because I was down a lot in fantasy football, and I ended up coming back from being down like 55 points and winning by like 3 or 4 points. So, fun game for me to watch, but pick wise, I had Jacksonville. Cincinnati pulled out the win in overtime, which gives me a 7-6 record on the week, and that puts my total at 127-65. Now, on to this week, we have Thursday night football. We have New England, I believe, on the road in Pittsburgh. Obviously, I'm going with the defense in Pittsburgh. Um, New England's offense is just so bad. It doesn't matter if it's Mac Jones. It doesn't matter if it's Bailey Zappi. It doesn't matter who's at quarterback. Their offense is just atrocious right now, and I think Pittsburgh's defense will just dominate them. You could see New England possibly get shut out 2 weeks in a row. Um, Other big things around the league. Obviously, with the Chiefs dropping a game and the Jacksonville Jaguars dropping a game, your 1 seed in the AFC now is up for grabs between Miami and Baltimore, who have a tied record. I believe 9-3 is their record currently. So, um, a lot to watch with those two teams as we head towards playoffs. Kansas City has an easy schedule to finish the year. They could easily win out and try and climb back into that number 1 seed picture, but they've got their work cut out for them. They've got to get their offense figured out. Um, with the NFC, San Francisco now has a tiebreaker over Dallas and Philly, so they have a very good chance of getting the 1 seed. They do still have some difficult games. They're playing Seattle this week. Their biggest hurdle to end the season is down the stretch. They're playing Baltimore. I'm not sure if it's a road game or not, but either way, it's Baltimore. Baltimore's always a tough team, especially for NFC teams who don't see him often or see them often, don't see Lamar Jackson often. Um, so a fourth loss could potentially bump San Francisco out of the 1 seed position, but currently they are sitting, technically they're still the 2 seed because they still have one more loss than Philly, but in the event of ties, they have tiebreakers over both Philly and Dallas. And I can go ahead and tell you right now, I believe Dallas will probably beat Philadelphia this week. It's the this game is in Dallas. I'd mentioned before Philly was kind of getting the short end of the stick. They played San Francisco on a long break. Now they're playing Dallas on a long break, so they're playing multiple teams that have had 10 days of rest before games. I don't really like that, especially this late in the season. But I want to caution Dallas fans because if Dallas beats Philadelphia, that's going to put them both at 10-3 at the end of the week. And on paper, due to the way tiebreakers work within the division, the number one criteria is division record. All right, and I say division record, it is your win percentage in division games is the way it's worded. Dallas will jump to lead the division because they both teams will have one division loss, which is to each other. They've split games head to head. And I say that head to head is actually the first tie break, but obviously in this case they'll have split head to head games. Dallas, however, has played one more division game than Philadelphia has. They have played Washington once. They've played the Giants twice, and this will be their second game for Philly. So their last division game will be the last week of the season against Washington. Philly, however, has not played New York either time. So Dallas will be ahead of Philly simply because Dallas has played one more division game. If Philadelphia beats Seattle the following week, and then the following week of that, they play the Giants, they beat them, and Dallas continues to win, their records will still be tied, but Philly will flip flop back to leading the division because they will have split head to heads, they will have the same win percentage in division games, and then the next criteria is win loss record in conference games. Dallas has lost 3 conference games. They have lost to Arizona, NFC team, San Francisco, NFC team, and Philly, NFC team. Whereas Philadelphia will have lost Dallas, NFC team, San Francisco, NFC team, and the New York Jets, which is an AFC team. So Philly will have the better win loss record in conference games. So if things go that way, Philly will jump back into the lead and control their destiny for winning the division. And obviously, they'll be needing San Francisco to lose a game so that they can get the 1 seed. So it's just something to watch for with the playoff races going forward. Obviously, the NFC, I mean, obviously, awards are heating up. Currently, I believe for me, Jalen Hurts is still my MVP, even though they lost to Philly. You look at Philly's record; they are 10-2. I think they easily lose 6 more games without Hurts. Both games against Washington, they were down. Hurts had to lead game-winning drives in both of those, so that's 2 games I think they would have lost without Hurts. I think they lose the first game to Dallas without Hurts. I think they lose the game to Kansas City without Hurts. They lose the game against Buffalo without Hurts. That right there is 5 more losses, and I think you could possibly put in the Patriots game week 1 or the Vikings game week 2. But 5 more losses puts them with 7 losses and um, 5 wins. 5 and 7 takes them from the 1 seed all the way out of the wild card position. So, and in those games, Hurts was clutch. He he put the team on his back. He led offensive drives. He got them in scoring position to win those games. I mean, they were down at halftime 4 games in a row, and they came back and won because of Hurts. So for me, it's not strictly about a stat line. No, Hurts' stat line is not sexy. It's not a typical MVP type stat line. But honestly, across the league this year, um, you're really not seeing super impressive stat lines. I mean, yardage wise, you're seeing several quarterbacks with a lot of yards. Um, I mean, CJ Stroud's leading the league with 3,500 yards, which is, I don't know how many yards per game, 295 yards per game. Um, Touchdown wise, Dak has the most touchdown passes with 26. Um, but ultimately, that's not a super impressive stat line. So let me pull up my calculator here and I will explain why. So Dak's played 12 games and he has 26 touchdowns. So he's getting 2.1 touchdowns per game. Obviously, later in the season, those numbers have been better than they were earlier in the season. But um, say he's averaging 2.5. So you do 17 games times 2.5. Oh, hang on. 17 times 2.5. That puts him at 42 touchdowns if he gets his average up. And, you know, obviously the year Lamar won MVP, he threw 37 touchdowns, led the league. That was a down year for offenses. This has been a down year for offenses. Um, but right now, I think Dak at best is third in the MVP voting for me. Hurts is 1, Purdy is 2, Dak is 3. The only way I can really see Dak winning MVP, and this is for me. These last several games, they're about to play some high-powered offenses. They're about to play Miami. They're about to play Buffalo. They're about to play Detroit, teams that score a lot of points. If Dallas's defense, they're going to have to not show up in those games, and they're about to play Philly, who's another good offense. So in those 4 games, I need Dallas's defense to average giving up 30 points a game in those 4 games, and then Dak lead the offense and score 35 points a game in those 4 games. And that, to me, could be enough for him to win MVP. And I say could because it's going to depend on what Brock Purdy does and what Jalen Hurts does down the stretch. If Philly's defense struggles in every game and Hurts is the reason they're winning, like they did in their 4 games that they were down at halftime, and Hurts played great in the second halves. If that continues to happen, then it doesn't matter what Dak does. Hurts is still my MVP. And uh, if Brock Purdy continues to play super good and Hurts falls off a little bit, then Purdy would be my MVP. So Dak needs both Hurts and Purdy to fall off, and he needs his defense to play terrible and him to play lights out. Because in all honesty, you look at Dallas's schedule. There's been 2 games really three that, I mean, I say that, all right, 4 games. 4 games that Dallas needed Dak to play super good in order to win. And it was the Arizona game when Dallas's defense was not playing well. They needed Dak to carry the team. He couldn't. They lost that game. The San Francisco game, Dallas's defense played terrible, gave up 42 points. They needed Dak to carry them. He didn't do it. He turned the ball over 3 times, threw 3 interceptions. The Philly game, Dallas's defense did not play well. They needed Dak to play well and carry them, and he did play well, but they still lost that game. And then last week against Seattle, defense didn't show up, gave up, I think, 35 points to Seattle. Dak played extremely well. He's the reason they won. So, in all these games that they needed Dak to play well because the defense was not playing well, Dak played well in 2 of the 4, and he only won 1 of the 4. The rest of the season, it really doesn't matter how impressive Dak has played because, and I say that, he's played well in a lot of games. I will give him credit for that. He's played very well in a lot of games. But ultimately, it's his defense takes his legitimacy as MVP away from him because week 1 against the Giants, doesn't matter what Dak did, they were winning that game. It's 40-0. Defense had multiple scores that game. The Jets game, they won 30-10. They didn't need Dak to play good. Patriots game, won 38-3. It didn't matter what Dak did. Now the Chargers game, it matters because it was close, but um, the defense ultimately, because the Chargers had the ball with the chance to try to tie it late, the defense made a play. So the defense is what shined late. So Dak kind of helped it. I mean, he did help in that one. So there's that. Um, Next, you have the Rams game. They won 43-20. Ultimately, yes, Dak played really well, but their defense played well enough that it wouldn't really matter who's at quarterback. Um, the Eagles game we already talked about. Then they played the Giants, won 49-17. Doesn't matter what Dak did. After that, they played Carolina, won 33-10. Again, the defense is what showed up there. And then obviously Washington, they won 45-10 on Thanksgiving. So his defense is what's hurting him in for me to give him my MVP vote. So there's that. This video kind of ran longer than what I anticipated, but uh, covered last week's games, covered some playoff seedings, covered some Green Bay stuff, covered MVP, and I gave my pick for tonight's game, Pittsburgh, and I'll get on here sometime this weekend, give the rest of my picks, and we will be back next week with um, more MVP talk and more playoff talk. Enjoy the weekend. Hope your team wins, unless you are a New York Giants fan. I need them to lose so Green Bay wins.